malika outside the temple. And if you do, you invalidated the sacrifice. Derech hechsherei mibachutz, if you do shchita outside the temple, which that's the correct way. Peturei b'fnim, if you do shchita inside, then you would be exempt. Because if you sacrifice the bird inside with shchita, and then you bring it outside, you're exempt because that's already invalid. Reb Shimon says, Kol shechayavan alav b'chutz, anything that you're obligated outside the temple, chayavan al kiyetzi bay b'fnim, kiyetzi bay b'fnim shehela b'chutz. You would still be obligated. If you would have done the whole thing outside the temple and you would have been guilty, then you'd be obligated. If you did it inside the temple and you brought it outside the temple, you're still guilty. With one exception. Of chutz min hashechet b'fnim umala b'chutz, except for if you slaughter it inside the temple and you bring it outside, you'll be exempt. You won't be guilty. Even though if you would have done the whole thing outside the temple, you would be guilty, but because you did shechita inside, you're not guilty. It's unclear what he's arguing about, because that seemed to be the only case that if you did it inside, it wouldn't be a problem. And the sages agreed to that. You know, he makes a rule and an exception, and the exception seems to be exactly what the sages hold of. We'll have to go through the Gemara. The Gemara is going to say what's he referring to. Okay, the Gemara started off with the Mishnah started off with when it said the rule, it said derech hechsherei b'fnim, or derech hechsherei b'chutz. What that sounds like is the way that it would be kosher outside the temple. And there's no such thing as kosher outside the temple. So the Gemara challenges this. Hayachsherei chiyuvayu. Doesn't mean kosher, it means guilt. It says tini chiyuvay. Edit the Mishnah and exchange it with the word chiyuvay, guilt, as opposed to kosher. Reb Shimon says, the Gemara asks, which ruling of the sages is Reb Shimon arguing on? If we say that he's talking about the beginning, he's contesting the first case of the Mishnah. What is the first case? Hamoylekayf b'fnim v'hela b'chutz is chayiv. And what does he say? No, first malak b'chutz v'hela b'chutz is pater. If you do malika inside the temple and you bring it outside, then he's guilty for offering it outside the temple. If he does malika outside, he's not guilty. Reb Shimon responds to them that kihechi de b'fnim mechayev, the same way that inside the temple he's chayev if he does malika, but chutznami mechayev, therefore he should be guilty outside the temple as well. The problem with that is that the expression that Reb Shimon uses, this expression, kol shechayavan alav b'chutz, everything that he's guilty outside the temple, is not correct. What it should have said is kol shechayavan alav b'fnim mi ba'ilei. Now, as if Reb Shimon holds that malika outside the temple is going to give him guilt, he should have said anything that's kosher inside the temple, that he then brings, anything that would be guilty that he does inside the temple and brings outside, he'd still be guilty if he does it outside the temple. That's what he should have said. He didn't say that. He said anything that's guilty outside the temple that he does inside. He said it the opposite. So therefore, try it another way. Ella kihechi de b'chutz lo mechayev. The same way outside the temple he's not obligated. Why? Because malika outside the temple is not guilty. So b'fnim nami lo lechayev. Inside the temple, if he does malika inside the temple, he shouldn't be guilty either if he brings it outside. And maybe this is what he means. Maybe Reb Shimon is telling us a leniency, that only something that you would be guilty if you did it. You would only be, if you would be guilty outside the temple, then inside the temple you'd be guilty as well. But over here, malika outside the temple, you're not guilty. So if you do malika inside the temple and take it out, you shouldn't be guilty either. And that's what he's arguing on. So hay kol she'ein chayavan alav b'chutz mi ba'ilei. you should say anything that you're not guilty outside the temple, not anything that you are guilty. Because malika outside the temple, you're not guilty, and he wants to say that malika in the temple is not guilty. Okay, so now we have to try it. We're not talking about the malika now. Let's go to the shchita. Rather, we're talking about Reb Shimon is contesting the shchita case. The sages said that if someone slaughters a bird inside the temple, then he brings it outside the temple, he's exempt. Why? Because it was invalid already. Shachat bachutz vehela bachutz is chayev. If he slaughters it outside and he brings it outside, then he is guilty, because that was done it was a sin, but it was done all kosher. It was slaughtering outside the temple, which is fine. Not fine. That's at least it wasn't malika. It wasn't with the fingernail. So Amalei Reb Shimon, and then Reb Shimon responds, Ki hechi de befnim loy mechayev. Just like inside the temple, you wouldn't be guilty if you did the shchita. So b'chutz nami loy mechayev. So therefore, if you do shchita outside the temple, you're also not guilty. So then, if that's the case, if that's what he's arguing on, that you should be not guilty of shchita outside the temple because it doesn't work in the temple. So hay kol she'ein chayavin mi ba'ilei. So say anything that you're not guilty inside. That's also what you should have said. It says anything that you're guilty outside. But the first thing is, it should have said anything that you're not guilty. Rather, so we have to say this differently. We'll take the second part of this. What's he talking about? Kihechi de bachutz mechayev. The same way that you're guilty outside the temple, if you slaughter outside the temple, and then you bring it outside the temple, so there's guilt on both. Bifnim nami mechayev. Then you should be guilty also if you slaughter inside the temple. The whole problem is haktani, but he teaches in the Mishnah, chutz min ha'shoichet bifnim avamala b'chutz, except for someone that slaughters it inside and takes it outside, that over there is going to be exempt. So what are they discussing here? They're talking about something totally different. They're talking about Machlekes says if you slaughter an animal in the temple at night. And there's some words that are missing here because we didn't mention this at all. So we have to explain how this works. It says, it's supposed to say, someone that slaughters an animal inside the temple at night, and then he takes it outside, he's exempt. Why? Because if you slaughter an animal at night, it's invalid. This goes according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that we had before, that even if you would bring it up on the altar, you were meant to take it off the altar because it was done by night. So therefore, if it's so invalid, then if you bring it outside, you're exempt because it's already invalid. Shachat b'chutz b'layla v'hela b'chutz. Let's say you slaughter it by night outside the temple, and then you offer it up, then he's chayiv. Because outside the temple, there's no difference between day and night. So therefore, it'll be chayiv on the shechita, it'll be chayiv on the offering it. Reb Shimon says, Kol shechayavan alav b'chutz, chayavan al ketzi by bifnim. If you're guilty outside, then you would be guilty if you did it inside as well, v'hela b'chutz, and then you went and you brought it outside. Chutz min ha'sheichadayif b'fnim v'hela b'chutz, except for the case of slaughtering it inside the temple, which that you would not be guilty even after you brought it outside. Okay, that's one interpretation of what the argument is, slaughtering by night, where the Tanna Kama holds that the person is chayev if he slaughters it outside. And Reb Shimon holds he's chayiv even if he slaughters it inside and brings it outside. It fits with the words, but you still have to add in the word. Kol shechayav no b'chutz, anything chayiv outside, you chayiv also inside, that you bring outside. Okay. Rava has a new interpretation. Kabbalah b'kli cholek b'inayu. Let's say he received the blood in a mundane vessel. We're getting back to what we discussed earlier. And this is what the Mishnah says. Hamakabel b'kli chol b'fnim v'ela b'chutz is pater. If inside the temple you use a mundane vessel, and then you take the blood outside and you offer it up, so it's already invalid. He's pater, he's exempt. However, makabel b'klichol b'chutz v'hela b'chutz, then he's chayev. If he uses a mundane vessel outside the temple and then he offers it up, he will be chayev. Reb Shimon says, kol shechayav ala b'chutz. If you're going to be guilty outside the temple, so then chayav al ketzibay b'fnim v'hela b'chutz. Then he's also guilty if he does it inside the temple and then takes it outside. It's considered like the blood was spilt if you receive it in a non holy vessel, in a mundane vessel. Okay. We have a third interpretation. V'hashta d'tani, and now that it was taught, Avua d'Shmuel, by Avua d'Shmuel, by Rav Yitzchak.
How do they say that? Why they say father of?
The father of Shmuel, by Rav Yitzchak. Yeah, that's a strange one, no?
Yeah.
Because it should be Rav Yitzchak.
Mm-hmm.
That's his father. What do you have? Do you have a note over there? My Gemara isn't concerned in the least.
So it cannot mean that he was the father of Shmuel, who was himself the son of Rav Yitzchak. Because Abba bar Abba.
Right, that was Shmuel's father.
Right. This is possibly the reason is because Rav Yitzchak was well known, whereas his father, Rav Yitzchak, was not. The sage referred to him as the father of Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak.
No, this is a different Shmuel, and it's saying the father of Shmuel, but we don't really know Rav Yitzchak by first name, so we just call him the father of Shmuel.
Saying they don't want to confuse him with somebody else named Rav Yitzchak.
It's more confusing to us because we know of Avu the Shmuel. Okay. Someone's going to come along with the manuscript. It's going to be different. So, Hamayla Kaif Bifnim, now that we know what Avu the Shmuel says, that Hamayla Kaif Bifnim, if someone does malik on a bird inside the temple, V'hela Bachutz, but he brings it outside the temple, he's chayav, and Malak Bachutz, if he does malik outside the temple, V'hela Bachutz is pater, and he brings it outside the temple, he's exempt, because malik outside the temple should not be done. For Reb Shimon Mechayev tells us clearly. Reb Shimon says he's chayev if malik does malika outside the temple. So therefore we know already Reb Shimon Hasan Kai. We know that Reb Shimon is referring to that case because we have this brisa. So Tani, so just teach the Mishnah, Kol shechayav av bifnim, anything that you would be guilty inside the temple, v'hela bachutz chayav al bachutz, and you bring it outside the temple, you're chayav outside the temple. Now the Gemara attempted to say this, but we had a problem with it because why are you saying anything that you're chayav outside the temple? You should say anything that you're chayav inside the temple, you're chayav outside the temple. So the term was wrong. So now that we have a brisa that matches up with this, so we're just going to amend the Mishnah to match the brisa. See, the way it worked was the Mishnah was edited, and certain sayings, they had these teachings for hundreds of years. For example, the teachings that were about when they entered the land, were they allowed to bring? Were they obligated to bring libations on private altars? That was a teaching that was hundreds of years old. because it wasn't relevant in those days. It had been something that they were memorizing for years. So if that's the case, so they have these old teachings that are being passed down. They get edited inside the Mishnah, but the Mishnah is not always so clear. There's some vagueness to the Mishnah. So what they do is they take these other teachings that weren't in here and they compare them, and they see what the Mishnah is actually referring to. So the term brisa means outside. Bar means outside. Bar could mean son of, could mean outside, like literally outside the room, outside. It could also mean eligible, like, fit to be, like bar mitzvah. Doesn't mean outside, or it doesn't mean son of. It means eligible. So, so brisa means that it's outside. So we compare the brisas to the Mishnah, and then it helps us understand what the Mishnah is referring to.
How to get connected to saloons?
That's what I was.
What is that?
Walked into a bar.
Oh.
It's a connection.
He said these 3 people walked into a bar. The guy says, "Is this a joke?" Okay. So, chatas shekibel dama b'kais echad. There's a new Mishnah. A carbon chatas that the blood was received. Let's stop here because we're going to have to review it to learn the Gemara. So we'll stop here. Tomorrow, 8 o'clock.
Yep.
Shabbos. Okay.
Shabbos.